Google has warned Australian users that its services are at risk in a dramatic open letter critical of the government's mandatory news bargaining legislation. Under a draft mandatory code announced by the consumer watchdog last month, tech giants like Google and Facebook will be forced to pay media outlets for news. A fortnight after the draft code was released, Google has responded via the homepage of its website, warning the change would hurt how Australians use Google Search and YouTube. Google's Australian Managing Director, Mel Silver, goes on to say in the letter that the tech giant will do everything it possibly can to get this proposal changed so we can protect how Google Search and YouTube work for you in Australia and continue to build constructive partnerships with news media businesses, not choose one over the other. Google has also begun alerting Australian Google users to their campaign with a pop-up notification whenever they do a search. Well, joining me live now is Communications Minister Paul Fletcher. Minister, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us this morning. So what's your response to that letter?
Well, our response principally is that we've got a process underway in relation to the development of this mandatory code. So our government started this process quite some time ago when the ACCC was asked to develop the digital platforms inquiry looking at the impact of Facebook and Google. They reported to government last year. It recommended there should be a code that regulated how the digital platforms used content generated by Australian news media businesses and, of course, paid for by those businesses, generated by their reporters who are employees of those businesses. And since that time, work's been ongoing to develop that code. We, in April, determined that would be a mandatory code. The ACCC issued a draft of that at the end of July, and there's now a consultation period. So Google and all of the other stakeholders now have the opportunity to put their views to the ACCC before it then finalises the code. So there's a proper, careful, thorough process underway to develop this important public policy.
Well, ACCC says that Google is spreading misinformation. Do you back that?
Well, Rod Sims has said that he feels that some of what's been said by Google is misinformation. And in particular, for example, he's pointed to the way that the ACCC, that Google has described what's going to be happening with data. Now, the point is Google collects a large amount of data from users, and the ACCC set that out in great detail in its digital platforms inquiry last year. Now, one of the elements that's proposed in the code is that Google should inform news media businesses of what is done with that data by people who are reading articles or items generated by those news media businesses. So it's not about new data. So look, Rod Sims is the chair of the ACCC. He has made those comments. He understands exactly what's in the draft code. And so, you know, the opportunity is there for Google and Facebook and all of the other stakeholders to put their views to the ACCC before it gives its final advice to government.
Well, what's your view? I mean, you said Rod Sims's view there, which is misinformation. I mean, what's your simple view of what Google is doing? Because, I mean, look, they say the way Aussies search on Google is at risk. Your search data is at risk. I mean, it's quite laughable, isn't it, that they say search data is at risk?
I must say one of the things that struck me was that this item that pops up when you do a Google search refers to the big media companies. Now, let's get some numbers into this debate. Google has a market capitalisation of $1,200 billion US dollars. The market capitalisation of News Corp, the biggest of the Australian news media businesses, is $9 billion US dollars. Of Nine Entertainment Ltd, $2 billion US dollars. So, you know, this language which seeks to characterise one side of this policy interaction as big businesses and by implication the other side not a big business, let's be clear, this is about the proper commercial terms for dealings between news media businesses such as Seven West Media, News Corp, Nine Entertainment Ltd and many other smaller media businesses as well on the one hand, and Google and Facebook. Look, Google and Facebook provide very useful services, widely used by Australians. Over 19 million Australians use Google every month. But the point is that we're going through a proper public policy process to determine if there ought to be a code to regulate the arrangements when Google uses information generated and paid for by news media businesses.
Some of the language that Google is using is pretty strong, though. I mean, it certainly seems like they are stirring for a fight. Will you back down?
Well, as the Treasurer said yesterday, as the Prime Minister said, our government has gone through a process here. It's not about, it's not unprecedented in these kinds of situations that big global tech companies will say things about whether they intend to continue operating in Australia. We've seen these kinds of things said before. We're not going to be swayed by that. What we're doing is working through a careful, thorough, proper public policy process where Google has every opportunity to put its case to the regulator, the ACCC. It had its opportunity to make detailed submissions before the draft code was released. It has got a further opportunity now. And of course, in due course, this will become a bill that will be debated by the Australian Parliament, and Google will have a further opportunity to put views to parliamentarians before they vote on it. So we're going through a proper, thorough, careful, democratic process. But of course, we expect companies operating in Australia to comply with the law of the land. What we're doing now is determining exactly what the rules should be in this area. There's significant economic interest at stake. It's no surprise that people put their positions vigorously, but we'll work through this in a careful fashion, and the ACCC will advise the government on what form the final code should take.